Hi, I'm David King, the editor and associate publisher of The Alt, and I'm joined by Katie Cusack, our music editor, and Jamaica Miles of Citizen Action. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
It's exciting. Katie did a profile of you last year.
Yes.
And you were in the middle of a number of campaigns. You're here today because I think a lot of people have heard about the push for paid sick leave in Albany, and there was a lot of support to begin with. I think we've seen a lot of pushback from the Business Council, a number of other places. Where are we now, and is this moving forward?
It absolutely is moving forward. We're talking about common sense legislation, which is typically what we are fighting for, is common sense. And the Paid Sick Days campaign is one that is a coalition movement, right? So Citizen Action is one of over 50 organizations or groups that are part of this coalition calling for paid sick days in Albany County. That's all of Albany County, not just the city. And there was a concern about additional carve-outs, right? That the legislation was too progressive or something, that it might be too hard on business, instead of what it started off as is making sure that the health and safety of individuals in Albany County, so residents and workers, are a priority, making sure that individuals are able to earn and take sick time as necessary so that they're not coming to work sick, and that their jobs are protected if they do need to take time off for being sick, right? Sounds like common sense. And there was a concern like, oh my gosh, are there some of these legislators that won't pass it if we don't have additional carve-outs? But there was a great press conference recently, and so now we're looking at, really moving forward and making sure that the core of this legislation is still intact and that we have the support that we started with.
So, the basic premise here being that you don't want people at work serving food sick. You don't want them to not see a doctor. And, I've talked to baristas who had come to work with concussions. I've talked to, people who had the flu, things like that while at work. I know you've dealt with a number of people who are in this situation or have to go to work this way. What's your take on how this affects them and the workplace?
Every single day, individuals are deciding whether to choose their health over their paycheck. They've got to say, okay, I know I'm sick, even if a doctor has told me not to go to work, but my manager, my boss, my employer has told me if I don't come in, I could lose additional days, or that I could lose my job. So if I don't go to work, how am I going to provide for myself and or my family? How am I going to pay my bills? But if I go to work, how am I going to be productive at work, stay healthy myself, as well as risk or not risk the health of others around me? This is a circumstance individuals shouldn't be in. That just it's insanity to think, oh, well, is it better or worse to be paid or to be sick? It doesn't make sense. And unfortunately, these are low-wage workers who are already struggling, right? And they're going to work sick because if they don't, the consequences could be that they're homeless or that they can't eat, they can't pay their bills. So there's not an option for them. They're choosing to go to work sick or to be incapacitated because they're forced to by their employers.
Yeah, absolutely. There's endless stories that could be told by anyone who's worked in the service industry at any time. Yeah. It's just as you were talking, I was just having these really dark flashbacks to fast food work and restaurant work. And it's true, you have to either choose one or the other or juggle both and be okay, how can I just push myself through this? And how long should people be expected to push themselves harder and harder until it's really detrimental to their health in a serious way?
And it doesn't have to be detrimental to anyone. There are counties and states all across the country that have already enacted paid sick days.
Yeah, so obviously we hear a lot about New York being super progressive and Albany specifically. But yeah, how do we compare? How far behind is Albany on this? What other places stick out?
Jersey City, which is very comparable to Albany County, has already passed paid sick legislation, and they did a 1-year study. They did originally have a carve out for 5 and under so that they would earn, I believe it's unpaid sick leave.
So places with 5 employees and under.
Correct. If an employer had 5 or less employees, they could earn unpaid paid sick leave. But then they did the study and found, one, there was no massive adverse effect to businesses that it was going to cost them all of this money. There was an increase in productivity, like things were better. And that when you asked those businesses, they said, yeah, this was good. There wasn't this overwhelming, I can't believe you did this, I'm suffering. That didn't happen. So there is already data and evidence for those that are thinking, prove to me that it's a good thing. Okay, we have. So we don't have to fight on this, right? We all agree we want businesses to be able to offer jobs to employees and not have high turnover rates. We don't want people to get sick. Okay, we're good. Let's move forward.
So how much do you think this is sort of the built-in, this is the way we've done things sort of mentality, or is it, do businesses really think they're losing money when this happens? I mean,
I think that unfortunately we live under this horrible narrative. There's several horrible narratives, including trickle-down economics, that you take care of the business owner and then everything else falls in place, so that we should prioritize businesses, don't give them increased taxes, like all of those buzzwords that make people nervous. So the knee-jerk reaction was, I heard you're making business do something, so it must be bad for business, as opposed to, we're doing something that is going to be good for everyone. But it's that translation, that horrible narrative that unfortunately comes up over and over again. So when the chamber said this is a bad idea, it created that, that uncomfortable feeling for, I think, some people, that they then went with what the chamber said, as opposed to taking a look at this either by the data or, your morals. And there are a number of nonprofits that have stepped up and said, no, this already works. I mean, there are businesses that already do this. The question is, why isn't everyone already doing this?
Mm-hmm. I feel like there's also that like really dark, sad mentality of people will take advantage of this program and this like something that's been allotted for them. Like, oh, you're going to have to lose all this money because everyone's going to use up all of their sick days all the time and like take advantage of this program that's like put out for them.
So I may not get the numbers exactly right, but close enough. Earning 1 hour for every 30 hours you work. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, what? 1 hour, and we're talking low-wage workers. Mm-hmm. So that potentially you're paying out $7, $8, $9 for 1 hour, and they've put in how much time and energy to be able to earn 1 hour to ensure that when they do come to work, they're fully productive, they're giving their best selves, that they have that sense of loyalty to an employer that says, you know what, I do want to make sure you're healthy because I know that you care about the work that you do and you're taking care of your family, and here we are in this community of a society and let's all work together. Mm-hmm. It's a win-win. You just have to remember that.
Yeah.
So what are the next steps? I know that the legislature hasn't voted on it, but what do you think we're going to see?
We're going to see continuing of education on the campaign, right? Mm-hmm. There are still individuals that are just not aware what this legislation means. So let's continue to fully educate the public. Let's make sure that the voices of those impacted people continue to be heard. A lot of people work and live in Albany County, but there are also individuals that live outside of Albany County. Liz James lives in the city of Schenectady. She works in Albany County. So this is impacting lives of individuals all across the Capital District. Mm-hmm.
And do you expect this would spark change in other counties? Should it be successful? I mean, you think this would be a beacon for...
I would hope so. Mm-hmm. I know that the Hudson Valley also is tackling this right now. And isn't that what we want? That when something good happens, other people say,
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh, that was a really good idea. We should do that here too." Especially those that stand up every single day and talk to constituents or at their council meetings or town halls and say, "I'm a progressive." Well, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. How are you creating progressive change in those localities that you govern and represent?
So speaking of progressives,
Yes.
we obviously that is the buzzword for this election in New York State. Obviously, Governor Cuomo has doubled down on the idea that he's a progressive. He faces Cynthia Nixon, who has clearly pushed him forward on a number of issues this summer. I think, obviously we saw the release of his marijuana study suddenly after his associates were convicted of, and donors were convicted of fraud and bid rigging. And we also saw him move forward on a number of things.
Yeah.
How real do you think these challenges are? I know you've worked with Cynthia Nixon and Jamani Williams, the councilman who's running against Kathy Hochul. What do they have to do to win, and what are you seeing upstate with when they've been here?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. It's called the Cynthia effect, right? If Cynthia says, here's what we need to do to make sure that we have real social justice inside New York State, and pick any issue, education, criminal justice reform, whatever, then all of a sudden there is Governor Cuomo, I am the champion, this is what I'm doing. Again, it's about education and conversations, because when the governor has stood up and said, this is the issue and I'm the champion of, all of us have had to look at the fine print. It has not been that quote unquote progressive agenda without qualifications. So when he says, I'm giving all parolees, or I'm going to have parolee voting, right? So
Right.
He is very careful with his words. I've said this before. He should have some type of acting award because he's really good at it. He's very convincing in his language. There's always a qualifier. And the qualifier for parolee voting is not every parolee has the option to vote, but that his office has the power and control to decide which one. But his executive order had the option of saying all parolees.
And that is, control is a key word there.
Yes.
We've seen him on these issues that he either doesn't quite get through the legislature or says he's in favor of, but the Senate Republicans who he's empowered don't move it. The grand jury for victims of police violence or shootings, there was a big push to give the Attorney General oversight over some of these cases, and the governor signed I don't know if it was an order exactly, but it was an executive action saying that the AG had this ability, but it's been a number of years. The families really pushed him, Eric Garner, the cases like that. The families were really on top of him, and he did that. But since then, we've seen no action in the legislature, and it still resides in his hands. And another governor could quickly come in and undo it. And so we see a lot of temporary things like that. And it gives him the power to say, if political tides turn, to just snap his fingers.
Yes.
But we're seeing political tides go in, perhaps not in the direction he expected. And another sort of indicator of that to me is that Kathy Hochul is lieutenant governor, who's someone from Western New York who, was not exactly pro-immigrant early on in her career. And, I think a lot of what the governor did early on was pander to Western New York because he didn't do well there initially, and he has a base in New York City, so he needs, obviously, the Buffalo Billion being...
Yes.
So Jamani is interesting because I think we've seen that Kathy Hochul isn't exactly popular downstate and has been trapped in some of these positions that either she took herself or that the governor sort of put her in, or she decided to stand by. What's Jamani? I know he's coming up next week. What's his messaging on all of this? What do you think his?
So it's really great. I've had a couple opportunities, not just to hear Jamani, but to speak with him, and he will be up for a panel discussion for community conversation about why we need to prioritize our public schools and not push kids into jail. And he's someone who's, in his role as city council member, been proactive and made changes within New York City, right? So we already know that the history is there, and it includes looking at issues such as criminal justice reform, police accountability, prioritizing, saying, you know, our children really need to be a priority and public schools need to be fully funded. So those are things that he already stands on, and we don't have to then worry, where's the horse and cart, right? Where's the horse trading going on, like we do right now with the governor, who said initially, I can't make the IDC come back. I can't make them whole. It's not my role or response. Like, he couldn't do it until he said, look what I've done. I have now rejoined our Democratic Party and blah. So it's only when it's convenient for him, whereas we look at the track record of Cynthia Nixon and Jumaane Williams. They have a history of doing the work without people watching, right? It's not as if, yes, Jumaane Williams is a city council member and he had to run for office, but he has one of the highest ratings for actually getting policy enacted in New York City. I actually believe he's second for the city council for getting policy enacted. That's something I'm excited about. I've got a governor who makes excuses about why things don't get done, or I had to give somebody this so I could get that. And Cynthia Nixon fought for education when it wasn't something to, you know, lift her hat to. You know, it wasn't a talking point for her. It was something that mattered, that she was fighting for decades for. And there are other social justice issues that she's fought for across the state. She's not like naive about the other localities that exist. She's not just this New York City candidate. Neither is Jumaane Williams. Both of them have come upstate and been to different places and had those conversations. So I'm seeing the difference of individuals who are fighting for true social justice, having community conversations to fully understand what are the needs of individuals, and then moving forward with what are the policies and legislations that we need to make that possible, right? Including restorative justice practices in our schools. Like, these are things they're putting forward that I'm seeing evolve over their own existence in the work that they've done, versus a governor who takes ideas from other people and calls them his own, or has really bad ideas and then changes his mind when he figures out it was a bad idea. Yeah.
Which has happened quite a bit historically,
Yeah.
Whether from bail reform ideas that he finds out were put forward by conservative think tanks, or we've seen it sort of over and over again on a number of pieces of legislation where I think either you can't get it passed if it's not the governor's idea,
right?
So you have to let him do it, and then he takes an idea from somewhere else that, you know, isn't exactly progressive. And you know, having watched the IDC come to existence, obviously the governor who has moved earth to get anything he wants done was there empowering them. And one of the biggest things I think that wasn't accomplished because of the split and the Senate Republicans being in power was the women's equality agenda, which the governor ran on and toured the state in a pink bus, and said that, you know, these are all things that were super important and there was no way we could move forward without them, and made it even a litmus test, I believe. And then the sort of the biggest, stickiest issue wasn't passed, which was encoding a woman's right to abortion into the state law, and because right now it's in the criminal law, I believe, rather than the health law. And so I think it's been, 5 years since he put that forward? Something like that?
Well, I'm sure it's the IDC's fault.
Right. Well,
right?
It was, right. And, but now we are actually obviously in a situation where the Supreme Court is likely to, and it will be up to states to defend the right to choose. So it's interesting now that we're in sort of a crisis, and the things that could have been done to put your your finger in the hole in the dam, or whatever, hold back the tide, haven't been done because the governor's been,
And you pointed out the fact that New York State is considered a progressive state. We shouldn't need to wait for someone else to create a crisis if we don't have it already within our state, right? If as a state we're progressive, we're leaders, if the federal government has something that protects people, it's there. That doesn't mean that we as a state shouldn't already step up and, say for ourselves, regardless of what the federal government says, this is where we stand on this issue, like Roe versus Wade. This is what it is for New York State, so that we don't have to worry about it later. And really just being the champion, being the leader. People look at New York State. We hear it all the time. Oh, if it happened in New York, it can happen anywhere. Pretty sure it's in a song, right? So that's the leadership I want. Someone that's going to stand firm, and also individuals that think for themselves. The image I get of Kathy Hochul is someone who follows around Cuomo. There's no chance that Jumaane Williams is not a man who stands on his own, who is capable of changing that office into being the voice for the people of the people, and really redefining the role of lieutenant governor, that Cynthia Nixon can really prioritize social justice and equity within all of our communities and make sure that we're not just beholden, right, to those billionaire donors that get people elected into office that Andrew Cuomo is. She's not taking that money. So her beholden is to those of us that get her elected. It's why the Working Families Party had, like, it was I am a Working Families Party member. I'm like, absolutely, we should totally have, that should be the endorsement, that yes, that makes sense, that works, because it completely lines up with the values of Working Families Party. So moving forward and fighting for that Democratic win, so that we're looking at Cynthia Nixon and Jumaane Williams on the Democratic line for that ballot in November. Super exciting times.
Well, I mean, one of the things I've heard from a number of folks who I won't name, but a number of legislators who obviously have been betrayed or beaten up by Cuomo for a number of reasons, Democratic legislators who are sort of looking for a sign that Cynthia Nixon is viable or can get a big win. And I think some of them saw, obviously Cynthia, I think campaign saw the victory of Ocasio-Cortez as an indicator that there's a lot of support there that's not being polled for left candidates to the left. And if folks aligned with DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, might be sort of off the radar of polling and things like that. And we had talked a little bit last week about the idea that the DSA might get involved in some of these issues that you guys are working on. Do you expect to see now more?
I really hope so, because we're what's the buzzword now? Radicals, right? That's the buzzword. And I can tell you there were plenty of radicals 50 years ago, and there are plenty of radicals now. And I think that we're facing that same type of era and that feeling. So yeah, we're the Democratic Socialists of America and other groups that traditionally we might not think of as stepping up and being politically engaged are looking around and saying, any old Democrat just won't do. We need someone who's really a champion for the people, and we're going to step out and be a part of that process. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure we'll check in soon. But And is there anything folks should do who want to make their voices heard on paid sick leave?
Absolutely. So if you live or work in Albany County, please contact the Albany County Legislature. Obviously, everyone can Google Albany County Legislature. If you want additional information, you can also contact Citizen Action of New York in the Capital District. Jamaica Miles, J Miles at citizenactionny.org if you don't already get my email blast. And just really let them know that this is important to you and they need to pass it now.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, and good to see you again, Katie.
Yes, of course.